is we need to be able to take these two concepts or ideas, bigger ideas, science of reading and the science of learning, and we need to be able to bridge them together. How can we make them both work together in unison so that we have an understanding of how to teach kids, how they learn, what's happening in their brain as they're processing all this information, but then taking the information of what the science of reading tells us about phonics instruction, about progressions, about the importance of phonemic awareness, about vocabulary and background knowledge and comprehension, like all of those pieces, and combine the two to create, an epic environment. Our brain needs to be worked out, just like any other part of our muscle in our side of our body. Like we have to be able to move it or else, we're going to end up losing it, right? So with your brain, you have to be able to use that muscle. But now we're using a lot more of AI. Ooh, does that mean that our brain is not going to be used as much? I don't know. Something to think about. Think aloud. Allow kids to hear and see the metacognition that's happening inside of our brains. So when we're sitting there thinking, wow, okay, actually, I don't like this word. Actually, I think that this word might be better. Oh, wait, if I change that word, is that going to really mess up my sentence here? Maybe I should change it and go ahead and see what happens. Like talking aloud and helping kids understand what's happening inside of your brain and really focusing in on the little voice in your head is really, really important. Hey there, Bridget Spackman here, and this is Teaching Made Simple, a video podcast that helps upper elementary teachers cut through the noise and focus on what really matters. So I got to tell you guys, I was in a classroom a couple of weeks ago, and when I was in that classroom, I go into support for literacy, and I do some coaching and support them in a very specific area. So I don't really get to see their entire literacy block. And so I was going into this teacher's classroom, which I have had the opportunity to really get to know her over the course of this year. And I can tell you, this teacher is unbelievably passionate about literacy. You know, the teacher that has like every certificate under the moon, has been trained in letters, and just can recite it front, back, side to side, like all the knowledge that you would want in a literacy teacher to putting these into practice to provide really good education for all students. So I was going into her room, and it was a little bit of a different time than I normally would go into. And so I walked in pretty early on in the classroom, and I was seeing something that I normally just wouldn't see. And so I kind of hung around for a little bit versus like stepping out and going into somebody else's room. And you could tell that she has so much knowledge and that she is, again, really passionate about literacy instruction. And as I was watching, she was talking about syllables, and then she was going into contractions. And I was kind of looking around the classroom, and I'm not going to disclose the school, the grade, any of that. But I will tell you that the content, while for us as literacy teachers, we are like, this is like really good information to know, right? Like syllables, syllabication, like we all need to know how to be able to do that. It wasn't something that was appropriate for this grade level. And so I continued to watch for a little bit, and I was looking around at the kids, and the kids had their heads down, and, she would ask some questions and nobody would respond, primarily because the content is a little bit too challenging for them. And so she was doing a lot of the conversations, a lot of the back and forth. Again, highly knowledgeable educator and very passionate about what she does. But it got me thinking that she has the knowledge, the literacy knowledge, what we would refer to as the science of reading. She has all of that knowledge. But what she was really maybe lacking in or needed more opportunities to sit and reflect and think about, like, what does this look like inside of a classroom, was the science of actual learning. Like, what is that process that we go through and actually in learning brand new content and being able to retain that information? And so I wanted to start this episode off, or the podcast off in general, having a conversation about what exactly is the science of learning and why this might actually be the most critical step in ensuring the delivery, the appropriate delivery of content that we're giving to our students. So I want to kind of backtrack a little bit back to the science of reading. Now, I feel like this is a topic that a lot of us in education are hearing. I mean, we've been hearing about the science of reading since pandemic times when it was really, really popping in education, and it still is. But what is so fascinating is that when you start to dig into what is the science of reading, which, by the way, it's really just a body of research. It's a collected body of research, and it's 50 years of research. And I know what you're probably thinking. You're like, wait a second, Bridget, like 50 years? I mean, we've only been hearing about it for less than 10 years. And some places may have been a little bit more advanced in the science of reading. But I'm going to be honest, like I've been in education for a while, and nowhere in my teacher prep programs, in my induction programs, in my trainings, like nowhere had I ever heard of the science of reading. Now, I've heard of phonics, and we taught phonics, but we never really heard of the science of reading. And so now that we're hearing this, and it's everywhere, we see it in curriculums, we see it online, we see it in podcasts, we see it in our professional development trainings, we see it in products that are being sold to us that it's science of reading approved, which, by the way, there's actually no FDA out there for education. Nobody is actually sitting there saying, oh, yeah, this is science of reading through and through, stamp of approval. That's not an actual thing. So we always have to look at everything through our own critical lens and with the knowledge that we bring to the table. So this whole idea of the science of reading is really important because it gives us the understanding of how to teach reading, because our brains are not born to become readers. Like we don't come out of the womb already having that ability to be able to read. Now, we do have the ability to hear and to speak if there's no disabilities that are taking place there, obviously. But we don't have that ability to read immediately. So we have to be explicitly taught how to read. And so that's what the science of reading does. It helps us become readers. But where it lacks is how to deliver that instruction effectively to students to ensuring that everybody's learning. And so when I go back and I talk about this classroom and this educator, and please know that this educator is an amazing person, and we all have areas in our careers that we're going to be able to grow in. What she really needed was just some insight into how kids actually learn. And so that's what this podcast episode is going to be today, is just uncovering exactly what is the science of learning. Now, there's a lot of debate, and when you go on and you start looking up research articles, like there's not a definitive definition of this is what the science of learning says. But I did kind of put one together. So here's what the science of learning is defined as. The science of learning is the research behind how the brain, and this is important, processes, retains, and applies new information. Now, this, just along with the science of reading, is going to be a body of different disciplines coming together to inform us about how kids learn. So we have cognitive science, we have psychology, we have, I think there's also neuroscience that's in here, and maybe even sociology that tends to play a little part here. But I mean, you're not going to be able to go online and be able to say, what are all the research pieces that help to make up the science of learning? Because I have yet to be able to find that for the science of reading. So it's really, really hard to kind of dig deeper into where is all of this information coming from. And so it's a lot of reading, a lot of researching. And I will tell you that my brain is in cognitive overload the majority of my days. So if we think about the science of learning as about the brain being able to process things, this can apply to anything in our lives. Y'all, like this is not just literacy instruction. This is math, this is science, this is social studies. This is learning how to cook, learning how to sew. If you're wanting to learn how to sew, learning a brand new sport. It can be anything in our lives, but it's how we process information in our brains and retain that new information into what we call long-term memory, because that's where we want all of our memory stored. And so what we need to do is we need to be able to take these two concepts or ideas, bigger ideas, science of reading and the science of learning, and we need to be able to bridge them together. How can we make them both work together in unison so that we have an understanding of how to teach kids, how they learn, what's happening in their brain as they're processing all this information, but then taking the information of what the science of reading tells us about phonics instruction, about progressions, about the importance of phonemic awareness, about vocabulary and background knowledge and comprehension, like all of those pieces, and combine the two to create, an epic environment for learning for students, right? And that's what we have to be able to do. But what's so frustrating in education is I feel as though everything is so siloed. So as educators, we don't get all this information in one shot, right? We have to look for information about the science of reading and phonics or vocabulary or comprehension. And then we have to go and look for information about cognitive theory and cognitive load and working memory and executive function and active student engagement. And then we have to somehow push all of these things together, which is really hard because let's just be honest, ain't nobody got time for that. You are busy. You have so many things that are calling your attention on a day-to-day. And by the time you get home, if you are a mom, a dad, you have a family that you're taking care of, and you don't have the time to spend hours upon hours upon hours researching these topics and putting them all together on yourself. This is where professional development is so important. And I believe that this is where this podcast is going to become of use to you. Because what I'm going to do is build and bring all of these concepts together to make it easy, actionable for you to be able to take it back and put it into your classroom. But we've got to lay the groundwork first. And I know people are like, I'm so tired of hearing, I will have to hear the why. But it's true. And we can't get rid of it. And I know you're tired of hearing the why, but you do have to have an understanding of why we're talking about some of these concepts, why it's going to end up being important, and why it's important to embed these into your own practices. Because if you don't have that understanding of why, you're really never going to have an understanding of what it means and how you should be doing it. So this is going to give you that deeper understanding, that higher Bloom's taxonomy that we often talk about, into the nuts and bolts of each of these different concepts that we're going to be talking to you about here on this podcast. So we're going to start off. Well, I mentioned that the science of learning is like a cognitive science. So to understand cognitive science, we need to understand cognitive thinking, cognitive awareness, and what that actually means. I gotta be honest, y'all. Like when I first started looking into all of this, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of cognitive stuff. What does this all mean? My brain really couldn't wrap around it. So let me give it to you in like plain, simple language here. Cognitive awareness is really thinking about thinking. It's what we refer to as metacognition, being able to reflect, be a critical thinker, have emotional intelligence, having the ability of learning to learn something. That is what a cognitive awareness does. And honestly, if we don't have that cognitive awareness, let's just be honest, we're not going to be able to, we can't be problem solvers. Okay. And I feel like I'm a mom to a teenager right now. So my son is a senior in high school. And y'all, I don't think he has cognitive awareness the majority of the time. And I believe any mothers to teenagers out there would probably like, yeah, my teenager is the same exact way. But they're not problem solvers. They have a really hard time of thinking. And I even that in some ways, with AI coming out, it's only going to make it worse, right? Because now we have something else to do some of the thinking for us. So our brains are not having to work as hard. And if you know anything about the brain, which it's such a fascinating part of our body, the brain is a muscle. So it's malleable. So it can change and move and develop and all these things. And so our brain needs to be worked out, just like any other part of our muscle in our side of our body. Like we have to be able to move it or else, we're going to end up losing it, right? So with your brain, you have to be able to use that muscle. But now we're using a lot more of AI. Ooh, does that mean that our brain is not going to be used as much? I don't know. Something to think about, food for thought, but that's not what we're talking about right now. So we're talking about cognitive awareness and that we have to have this ability to self-reflect, to think about our own thinking, to be able to have that self-efficacy of saying, ooh, you know what? I noticed that I'm having a hard time with this. So I need to stop and I need to maybe go ask a question or look something else up so that I can start to put these things together and make more sense of it. Or if you're coming to a situation where, let's say you have a problem in your house and you need to be able to fix it, you have to have the ability to problem solve. Well, what is happening? Why is this happening? How can I start to solve this problem? Like these are all questions that we ask ourselves because we have cognitive awareness and we need to help develop that into our students. How many times do you sit in a classroom and everybody's working and then all of a sudden a sweet little kiddo comes up to you and says, what am I supposed to be doing? And you look at that baby and you're like, what is going on in your brain right now? Like, honey, how did you not know that we are working on this assignment? Like it's on the board, like where was this lost in translation? And so that's because that child doesn't have self-efficacy. They don't have the ability to be able to reflect and say, wow, I'm not doing anything. Everybody else is doing something. And I'm finding this really hard. Maybe I should go and do something about it. So that was often when I was a classroom teacher that I would those goals onto report cards. We need to have self-efficacy. We need to build that in our students so that they can advocate for themselves when they need something as a learner. So that is the importance of cognitive awareness. So when we think about cognitive awareness, because you're probably sitting there saying, but Bridget, how in the world am I supposed to teach that? I got you. Like, how do we teach that as educators? And how do we embed those practices inside of our classrooms? Well, for starters, we model that. And that's why a lot of the think alouds are really critical, because think alouds allow kids to hear and see the metacognition that's happening inside of our brains. So when we're sitting there thinking, wow, okay, actually, I don't like this word. Actually, I think that this word might be better. Oh, wait, if I change that word, is that going to really mess up my sentence here? Maybe I should change it and go ahead and see what happens. Like talking aloud and helping kids understand what's happening inside of your brain and really focusing in on the little voice in your head is really, really important. But there are 3 key areas that really back up cognitive awareness that supports the science of learning. And these 3 key areas is what we're going to be digging a little bit deeper into in some of the upcoming podcast episodes. And so the first one that we're going to look at is going to be working memory and cognitive load. Now, you're probably sitting here saying, Bridget, this sounds really theory heavy. And yes, you're not wrong. It is theory heavy, but I promise to break it down enough for you that it's going to be easier for you to make connections with. So we're going to talk about cognitive load and working memory because there's only so much that our brains can handle at any given time. Have you ever gone into like a professional development training, like it's a full day professional development training? And in that training, you go to all of these amazing sessions. It's like back to back, hour after hour, great sessions. By the end of it, you're exhausted. You feel like you need to take a nap. You feel like your brain is hurting. That's cognitive overload. That's what happens in our working memory. Our brain can only hold so much information before it starts to decide, wait a second, do I need this information? And if it doesn't need it, it gets rid of it. You lose that memory. You lose that information that you're trying to learn. And then if you have that information, Then it decides, all right, well, now I need to try to put it into long-term memory. And it starts trying to group things into different schemas or like little file folders that we have on various types of concepts. And our brain is constantly working really fast on trying to organize all this information. But if you're sending more information into that working memory, it's not going to be able to do anything. So it's just going to end up losing it. And once your brain is at capacity, learning stops. That is important. Learning stops. So this idea of having an awareness of the importance of working memory and cognitive load is critical, because if you think about some of your lessons, and this is at no fault to educators in any way, shape, or form, because a lot of the time the systems tell us we have to do it this way. But let's say you have an hour, and we're going to make it easy, 30 minutes literacy block, which if I had an hour and 30 minutes, I would have been so happy. A lot of the times I had an hour and 10 or 15 minutes to teach reading and writing, grammar, all of the things. But in this hour and a half, you have a grammar lesson, you have a warm-up that maybe you have your kids come in and do, and it's like a spiral practice type thing that you have them working on. DOL. Y'all, if you don't know what DOL is, look it up, because that's what we did back up in the day. You might have that spiral practice. You might have a grammar lesson. You also might have a word study, morpheme lesson that's happening in there. You might have handwriting practice that's happening in there. You're going to have a comprehension practice that's happening in there. Oh, and then you're going to have small groups for all of these things. And then you're going to have a writing lesson on top of that. Think about the cognitive overload of your students by the end of your block. And so if you're giving them so much information that they're having to remember and learn, they can't remember it because everything is so disjointed that they start to forget it. And so one of the other sessions that we'll talk about is what we call with the forgetting curve. And that's going to be a really important thing to kind of wrap your brain around, because it does play such a big role in how we as educators are presenting information to our students, but also reviewing information with them as well. So if you have all of these different lessons, it's too much. It's overloading your students. And so you're sitting there wondering, well, why can't they remember it? Why are they not applying it? Why do I feel like I'm constantly repeating myself? It's because you are. You are repeating yourself because you're trying to give them way too much information that they don't have the opportunity to process into their brains. Okay? So that's going to be one of the things that we'll talk about with the science of learning. The other concept that's out there around the science of learning is going to be this idea of retrieval practiced and spaced repetition. Retrieval practice and spaced repetition, which, by the way, are two very different things. Okay. And so we will dig into them a little bit deeper. But you know that saying of if you don't use it, you lose it. This is what they're talking about. We're talking about that retrieval practice that is necessary to help retain the information inside of our brains. Now, I really love movies. One particular movie that I really enjoyed using as a literacy teacher was the movie Inside Out. I loved it because of the emotions. I loved it also because of plot. It has a very beautiful plot line. So in the very beginning, if you've never seen Inside Out, I highly recommend it. There are two of movies now. The first one is the one that I'm referencing. But in the beginning of the movie, they talk a lot about the background knowledge. You get to know Riley, you get to know the emotions, where they all came from, what are some of the things she likes. Exposition through and through. It was perfect for that. And then you have the inciting incident, which if you're sitting there thinking it's them stabbing the for sale sign in the yard, you are correct. And then you have the rising action until we get to the climax. But what I loved about it was that you had two different plot lights happening as well. It's a great, great, great movie. And so I would introduce plot or review plot, however you wanted to do it, with that movie. And the kids would have to track the plot lines throughout the movie. So they would create a plot mountain. And they really, really loved it. So there's a little tidbit that you can take back and put into your classroom if your kids are really struggling with plot. But one of the things that I loved about this movie is that allowed me to build this connection of retrieval practice is that part in the movie where sadness and joy, they are lost, and they're lost in the maze of where they have the memory orbs and the glowing orbs, right? And each orb has a different color to reflect the emotion that was felt when creating that memory. And as they're kind of walking through and they're looking at all these memories that are just kind of on stacks, right? They're just stacked up. There are these guys who have kind of this big tube, and the tube is collecting the orbs that are not being utilized. And you can always tell the orbs that are not being used or being retrieved in this case because they're grayed out. And so they are sucking all of them up, the orbs that are the memories that are not even remembered anymore, and they're going to send them off into the area where Bing Bong, spoiler alert, Bing Bong ends up passing away, right? Like he ends up disappearing because he's forgotten in this like area of the forgotten part of your brain. But that's what retrieval practice and spaced repetition does, that if we are not intentional as educators about bringing back concepts where kids are actively having to retrieve from their long-term memory back into their working memory, that information is going to end up getting lost. And so what ends up happening is that you, and this is primarily really present, especially in math, but also in literacy as well. But let's say you teach a math unit, and in that math unit, you are doing addition and subtraction or place value, whatever you wanted to pick. You come back a couple of months down the line, and then you give them a practice because, like big testing season's coming up, right? You got to make sure you're reviewing and you're checking on all the boxes and making sure kids are doing it. And then as they're practicing, you're like, oh my gosh, you don't remember this. And you're like, honey, you did so well. Like you had like straight A's, or you're an AB, whatever it might be. You knew this back in September. It's like February. Why don't we remember this now? That's because we haven't had opportunities for retrieval practice. So we'll dig in a little bit deeper about what that looks like, because there's very specific numbers that science tells us that we need to be really pulling into our classroom practices and planning for when we're pulling out that information. So we'll talk more about that retrieval practice and spaced repetition. Spaced repetition is essentially like spiral practice. But with spaced repetition, again, numbers are really important here. And we want to make sure that we're constantly bringing things up so that they have those opportunities to practice it. So that's the second area that we're going to have conversations around the science of learning. The third one is one that I feel like is really close to my heart, because this is an area that as an educator, I didn't realize that I was doing it. I just thought it was like my own personal teaching style until I started learning about it. And I'm like, oh, I was actually doing a really good job. Have anybody else felt those types of things before where you're like, oh, that's why I do that thing. Like, I know that there was a reason that I'm such a great teacher. Jokes. That's not a reality. I honestly have so much growing and learning to do. But the last kind of bigger concept and area that we're going to focus on when it comes to the science of learning is the power of engagement, active learning. Listen, learning is not a passive sport, okay? It is not something that you can simply listen to, observe, and then immediately go back and do. So here's my connection to this. As I'm recording this, it is 2025. So in 2024, the summer, we had the Summer Olympics, okay? Did you watch the Summer Olympics? I did. You know what I mean? I watched it with my family. It was a great time. We really enjoyed it. We enjoy watching the events, cheering on USA. So because you watched it, I mean, you saw them doing what they were supposed to be doing. Simone, you can talk about her. Like, you saw that she was doing all these great things. She even talks about how she did these things. Michael Phelps talked about how he did all these things, and you saw videos. He wasn't in this one, but you saw videos. You can go back and look at videos of how he swam. Because you saw it, because you listened to it, can you now go out and be ready to do the Summer Olympics? No, of course not. I would basically pull my back. I'm just getting down the stairs to leave my house. That is not a possibility for me. But that's the power of engagement and active learning. And sometimes as educators, we have such great knowledge and we want to share this knowledge with our students that we often forget about how we are engaging students in participating. And y'all, I'm not talking about engagement as like we're giving them like practice worksheets. You're going to find I hate worksheets so very much. Now, I know that it's a necessary evil in some ways and that we have to have some of these sometimes. However, it is not an everyday thing. Like we don't have to have them all the time. And so you're going to hear ways that I've incorporated other types of engagement into my own classroom as we kind of go into some of these other episodes. But when students are actively participating, I'm talking about they're responding. They're saying something, they're doing something, they're writing something, they are engaged in the learning, then that is when they're going to be able to retain information. But we can't expect students to passively listen, to passively observe, and then be able to go out and do it on their own, because that's not a reality. And so part of this power of engagement and active learning, we have to think about building oral language. We have to think about how are we providing feedback to help with students in their learning process. And so some things that you can really think about is just encouraging more movement, adding in discussions, doing hands-on activities. Y'all, I love me a sort. You're going to find I am a sort person through and through. And so having sorts for kids to be able to work on and have oral language around is going to be a very simple thing that you can do, but it's going to support them in their learning development of any concept that you're doing. So those are going to be the three areas, and I'm going to share them again. Some of those key research-based principles that we talked about. First one is working memory and cognitive load, okay? The second is going to be retrieval practice and spaced repetition. And then the last one is the power of engagement and active learning. And what I want you to do, because you're probably sitting here saying, well, Bridget, you're not really giving me any big takeaways, anything that I can take back and put into this into my classroom. Well, you're right. This was really setting the groundwork for you and trying to help you understand the importance of the science of learning, because that's what's going to be referenced throughout some of these upcoming episodes that we're going to be talking about. But I want you to just take today and I want you to reflect on your own teaching. How are you providing repetition? How are you ensuring that you're not overwhelming and overloading your students cognitively with the information that you want them to work on? And we'll dig deeper into each of these concepts. And then how are you engaging students with active participation, discussions, oral language, movement, all of these pieces? And I want you to reflect about how this looks like in each of the areas that you teach, whether it's the science of learning, whether it's math, science, social studies, whatever it might be. But how are these incorporated and how is it important for all of this to be embedded into each of these key areas? Okay, because that's going to be a critical first step, is just reflection, right? We have to reflect in order to recognize, oh, wait, yeah, I do that. And maybe I need to change some things up a little bit. So the topic today was a pretty hefty topic. It felt like a lot of theory. This is probably a super quick takeaway, not much that you're strategy based here. I promise we'll get into the strategies very soon. But the reality is that this process is really complex. It's really something that as educators, we need to be more aware of in order to ensure that we're providing the best possible experience for our kids. So what I want you to do is reflect on your own practices, okay? And I want you to be able to take something away from this episode. Hopefully you have one little bit of nugget that you're that's a light bulb moment for me. And if you have that light bulb moment, I would love if you just come and DM me on Instagram. I would love to hear from you. And that's one of the things that I think I enjoy the most is this collaborative nature that we have with educators. It's not a competition. We're not here to pinpoint anyone. We're not here to single people out. We're here to grow and learn from one another. We all have experiences. We all have perspectives. We all have stories that we can share with one another in order to learn and grow as individuals. And so take some time. Please send me some type of a message. Let me know what your aha moment was. You can follow me over on bridging.literacy in Instagram. I'm also Bridging Literacy on YouTube. If you're watching this as the video podcast recording, you can just put it into the comment section there. But come by me, connect with me, and let me know what you thought of this very first episode. I also just want to say really quick that I just appreciate every single educator that's out there. I know that this is a really hard time when it comes in education because lots and lots of things are changing very fast, it seems like. And so I appreciate the work that you are doing. I appreciate how you are showing up every single day, tired, just mentally, physically, just drained with all of the expectations that are being placed onto you because it is a lot right now in education. So please know that you have somebody in your corner that is cheering you on, that is rooting for you, and that appreciates you through and through for what you are trying to teach students every single day. So thank you so much for bringing your own uniqueness, your experience, your own perspectives that really allows for us to be able to grow from each other. Until next time, keep showing up, keep making a difference, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.